Please welcome Susan Sucher.
Hello. I am so glad to be here today to talk with you about one of my favorite aspects of Chesterton's writings, his discussion of women and domesticity. I'd like to begin with a quote from the Napoleon of Notting Hill. In it, Adam Wayne complains about the farce of modern liberality, saying, freedom of speech means practically, in our modern civilization, that we must only talk about unimportant things. We must not talk about religion, for that is illiberal. We must not talk about bread and cheese, for that is talking shop. We must not talk about death, for that's depressing. We must not talk about birth, for that is indelicate. It cannot last. Something must break this strange indifference, this strange dreamy egoism, this strange loneliness of millions in a crowd. Something must break it. Why not you and I? In this presentation, I plan to talk about religion, cheese, birth, and death. After all, no one came all the way to this conference to talk about the weather. In Chesterton's Emancipation of Domesticity, he states that there must be in every center of humanity one human being upon a larger plan, one who does not give her best, but gives her all. What exactly did he mean by that, and how does it apply to our lives today? Chesterton clearly saw the home as the institution for which all the others exist. The home was not an afterthought or of less importance than the outside world, but the most important place, which had the most important people in the society, the children. Children in Chesterton's worldview are the future, and the education and formation of those children, the most important function of society. Chesterton saw women as uniquely suited to the task of educating and forming children in many ways. There are obvious biological reasons women are designed to care for infants, giving birth and breastfeeding, of course. Beyond the capacity of women to be broad, to be generalists is one of the most important reasons that women are well suited to the task of this larger plan. Men tend to be specialists, to focus on a task or individual mission. Chesterton called them monomaniacs. Women, on the other hand, have a capacity to be much broader. They see the larger picture. Okay, I'm going to talk into it. All right, is that good? Okay. I'm a little too broad. Okay, so they see the large picture and can work to ensure that they meet the needs of a whole human being. In fact, a woman is so broad that she has the ability to tend to the needs of an entire set of people, the family. The power of this broadness is a strength when applied to the family, and it's also a strength in the workplace. Chesterton, however, would argue that while a woman can be incredibly good at office work and professional work, her talents are meant for a larger purpose, that of the home and the family. If this causes you some consternation, consider where you may have developed the idea that the workplace was more important than the home, and then reconsider whether you truly agree with that notion. If the idea that work in the home, unpaid work, could be more valuable than that which requires credentials and earns a paycheck, it's countercultural, but is it correct? Is it possible that Chesterton was correct? Is it possible that when the Industrial Revolution brought men and now women out of the home, we left the domestic sphere neglected, even though it was of primary importance? Do we believe that the home is the most important sphere anymore? And if so, do we act like it? We all know the struggle that women who work outside the home have. Chesterton describes it this way: I do not deny that women have been wronged and even tortured, but I doubt if they were ever tortured so much as they are tortured now by the absurd modern attempt to make them domestic empresses and competitive clerks at the same time. Over 100 years ago, Chesterton saw the struggle that modern women were facing, one that is amplified today, yet many of us cannot even see the root cause. Chesterton tells us that we must understand why a fence exists before we decide to tear it down. Interestingly, he told us this in the context of the household and home, in a chapter from his book, The Thing, called The Drift from Domesticity. As a part of Generation X, I grew up in a post-fence world with regards to women's so-called liberation. And I have spent the greater part of my adult life trying to patch that fence and put my life back in order. One could argue that our whole society has suffered from the uninformed destruction of that fence. Chesterton puts it this way: his complaint of the anti-domestic drift is that it is unintelligent people do not know what they are doing because they do not know what they are undoing. The journey towards an appreciation and commitment to domesticity has had many consequences in my life. I left a high-paying, intellectually rigorous career for the wild and unpredictable and very dirty, messy life in the home. I have learned to find joy and wonder in my children, even as I wonder, where do they all come from? And how will I have enough to feed them? I have learned to value the more important things in life, and with that realignment of my values, I have stopped caring as much how the world sees me and focused more on the eternal. I have been there with my children for all the events of their lives, from their education, on adventurous treks across the country, to all the little questions and trifles of ordinary life. And even as I held my newborn in my arms, and the doctor told me that things did not go as they hoped, and she didn't have long to live. Through all this and more, Chesterton has been a constant and faithful companion along the way. Chesterton says that in everything on this earth that is worth doing, there is a stage when no one would do it except for necessity or honor. Anyone who has parented toddlers or teenagers knows exactly what he's talking about here. Women today are expected to do it all. We frequently work outside the home, and even when we are home, we are inundated with myriad expectations, from fitness goals to elaborate place settings. Online forums are filled with comments from women concerned about their inability to balance these competing interests. Being a stay-at-home mother, however, is only possible for a privileged few. As of 2014, according to a survey by Pew Research, only 20% of mothers of minor children were staying home with those children, despite the fact that 65% of survey respondents felt that children were better off with a parent in the home. This was the dilemma I faced in my young married life. Prior to meeting my husband, Greg, I was briefly married, very young, and then divorced. At 22, I was working full-time, going to college, and taking care of my two young boys. After that detour in my life, I was preparing myself for the career that I had planned for from the time I was a child. I had always planned to work out of the home. I was going to have a nanny. I was going to have a maid. Woman plans and God laughs, right? So I could never fathom only staying home. There was a wrench in my plans, however. These beautiful children that I had, I brought them to the daycare, and I felt like I was leaving a piece of my heart, okay? So these competing interests, I didn't know what to do with that. Greg and I became engaged, and there were many issues that needed to be worked out prior to our marriage. I came into the Catholic Church 21 years ago as a part of that discernment process. And in addition, I told Greg, I said, I already have a couple kids, and I put them in daycare, and I couldn't stand it, right? So if we're going to have more kids, I'm going to have to go back to work. Well, my husband is an actuary, right? And that's what I was working on before I stayed home. And he took a little bit of convincing. So I made a spreadsheet and I did my projections. We had a business meeting, and I won the argument because I win a lot of them. So so I was happy, right? I got my way. I was home with the kids. except I wasn't. All right. So much of my identity was tied up in my job, the external approval, the application of my degree, the prestige of a title, clean clothes at the end of a day, and a healthy paycheck. To become only a stay-at-home mom was devastating to my perception of myself. I literally wept over what I perceived as a lack of freedom. I was so convinced by our culture and my upbringing, my educational formation or deformation, that somehow working outside the home was the only path to freedom, self-expression, and taking care of myself. The antidote to this destructive perception was found in the writing of G.K. Chesterton. In Chesterton, I found an affirmation of the preeminence and innate value of the work in the home. Women, in their privileged roles as keeper of the home, guard the most sacred and free arena in society. In his essay, Woman, Chesterton echoes Will Crook's observation that the most sacred thing is to be able to shut your own front door. Shutting my own door took on a new meaning as I decided to take my children out of the public school system in 2002, largely to avoid political and sexual indoctrination that was nowhere near as egregious as it is now. This paradigm shift led to others. I was questioning everything. Home birth followed shortly after homeschooling. There was behind both of these decisions a desire to drink more fully from the font of life's experiences. I found in Chesterton a desire to experience the good and sensual things in life fully, a sort of anti-Puritanism that was incredibly liberating. In contrast to the licentiousness of my youth, this was a properly ordered appreciation of God's creation. Shutting that front door allows our family to relax and reconnect, to allow time for leisure and prayer, to be free. Women are, by and large, the guardians of that freedom. We must take that duty seriously. The home should be a place of creativity and rejuvenation. It is the thing for which the rest of society operates. By creating a refuge, by being the half of humanity set upon a larger plan, women guard true freedom. Paradoxically, freedom that can only be found when you shut your front door. In this home, Chesterton points out, the average woman is at the head of something with which she can do as she likes. The average man who works outside the home has to obey orders and do nothing else. Domestic work is in some small degree creative and individual. She can put the flowers or the furniture in fancy arrangements of her own. She has the freedom to cook artistically, even if she doesn't always do so. All right, like I just want to point that out. He didn't turn me into Betty Crocker, okay? So he does miracles, but not that kind. All right. So as a convert to Catholicism and to the domestic sphere, I initially fell prey to the notion that I must conform to a certain type of womanhood in order to be a good wife and mother. I thought erroneously that I should conform to someone else's ideal or to try to imitate certain role models or influencers. That, my friends, is a recipe for disaster. As it turns out, my talents do not lie in perfectly organized closets, nor do they lie in immaculately decorated homes. I am more of a messy hospitality, spontaneous camping trip, piles of books, and laundry kind of mom. Education and formation of one's own children is what Chesterton was talking about when he said, if a thing is worth doing, it is worth doing badly. Thanks be to God. This thought inspires me daily to begin again, knowing that I don't need to give my best, but to give my all. Chesterton knew that this most important work was so large and important that if a woman dedicated herself to it, she would provide for her own domestic sphere those specific talents and gifts that were needed. This, of course, is very individual, and comparisons in this area are both counterproductive and completely irrelevant. As Chesterton points out, being different is something to be celebrated. We learn more about this concept from a surprising source. This permission to be ourselves comes from Chesterton's essay on cheese. Bear with me for a minute. And I'll explain. Conformity, according to Chesterton, is artificial, mathematical in shape, not merely universal but uniform. By a wise doom of heaven, men were commanded to eat cheese, but not the same cheese. Being really universal, it varies from valley to valley. We too vary from valley to valley. To extend the analogy, each of us are a fine cheese. You may be a sharp cheddar, or a rich creamy Gouda, or a tangy blue cheese. Your neighbor is likely another variety altogether. According to Chesterton, it is good and holy for each and all cheeses to be unique. Our modern society, especially through the proliferation of social media, might cause us to believe that uniformity is desirable and that there was some sort of universal external standard to which we must aspire. Chesterton, however, would embrace the differences in each and every one of us. We are each our own local flavor and should be celebrated, and never succumb to the false notion that uniformity is even desirable in the first place. Embracing domesticity does not necessarily mean perfect Pinterest-worthy cookies. Although it might, it doesn't mean holding yourself to external standards and pressures. According to Chesterton, it is more a spirit of freedom, despotism even, to recognize and accept the great power and responsibility that comes from being the empress of your domain. It is to embrace being fully alive. Chesterton was one of the biggest advocates for women of all time. He understood femininity and womanhood and defended it against the onslaught of progressivism. He always thought that we should be able to understand what we were progressing towards. In the case of gender ideology, he rightly prophesied that we were headed towards the abyss. Women, like men, had in the home a defense against the vulgarity and coarseness of the time. If man was the king of the castle, then woman was the empress of her domain. As the modern workforce brought men out of the home, they were slowly transformed into wage slaves. And Chesterton feared that as more women followed in their footsteps, they too would be shackled by the paycheck and obligation outside the home. In Chesterton, I found an antidote to the modern idea that value was defined by the amount an employer was willing to pay for one's services. In fact, the most important things in life really were free and couldn't be purchased. Once I realigned my values and paradigm to Chesterton's perspective in lieu of the world's, I found a freedom and value I never thought possible. Individually, men may present a more or less rational appearance, eating, sleeping, and scheming. But humanity as a whole is changeful, mystical, fickle, delightful. Men are men, but man is a woman. By devaluing women's unique contribution to society, not only are we degrading women, we are degrading society as a whole. We do not need to be monomaniacal as a whole. If we fail to recognize the feminine genius on an individual level, we are more likely to discount it on a societal level. By elevating science and experts above all other voices, we have discounted the feminine aspects of mankind as a whole and provided a culture ripe for totalitarian and authoritarian monomaniacal domination. Our world would be a better place if we placed more value on feminine concerns, the care and nurturing of children, visiting the sick, spending time with the elderly, providing for each member of the family of man a loving and welcoming environment within which to grow and learn and thrive despite the obstacles. Chesterton also helps us see the beauty of children. None of us can approach God's intellect or attain all the knowledge of the universe. Chesterton was such a genius, but he knew that he was little more than a child in the light of God's perfect intellect. How much God loves us all in our imperfections. Love for children means spending time with them, putting aside the more important adult matters and participating in their world, a world of wonder and joy and games. Gilbert and Frances Chesterton did this with their Christmas parties for children. They gave children a preferential place in their life, despite their own personal cross of infertility. In my life, prioritization of children has come in many ways. I have learned to make time for play, to put aside my own interests and look into my children's eyes and really hear them, to find joy and wonder in God's creation with them. After all, finding joy and wonder in God's creation is the first step to get to know Him, and one of the most important things a mother can help her children do. Part of my examination of conscience each night is to ask myself if I have taken time to find joy and wonder with my children that day. I have also learned much from spending time with my children. A child does not needlessly complicate things, as I had been doing with my comparisons with other people. Relieved of the expectation of knowing everything and having all the answers, finding joy in the moment and in the little unexpected events of everyday life became possible. From Chesterton's writing, especially on education in the domestic sphere, I learned to prioritize joy. It is good to prioritize joy. While there's tasks that need to be done and a certain amount of order in the home, okay, thank you, is requisite for children to flourish, maintaining this sense of joy and wonder is a priority and not a second best, and it certainly took precedence over the giant lists of tasks to perform or skills to acquire. The domestic sphere is the one for which all the others exist. Nothing I could do outside the home was more important. Society exists for the family and not the other way around. Again, yes. And Chesterton agreed with this principle of subsidiarity. That is, that the smallest unit of government should have the power to make decisions. The smallest unit should have the right and privilege to exert authority over a situation, and that unit is the family. The mother, as keeper of the home and empress of her domestic sphere, has a lot of freedom and power in this realm. Liberation is to be found for both sexes within a proper ordering of society. When we remember that the home is the primary institution and the one for which all the others exist, both men and women have the maximum amount of freedom, particularly in the working class. What does this mean? This leads to distributism. If you don't have this, you can't have a distributist economic situation. It means that we prioritize leisure over possessions. Right? If the second BMW is your priority, Chesterton's not your man, okay? Recognizing that the significance of an act is not proportional to the amount of remuneration you receive for it. Placing children in the highest position. The family exists for the child, even in families where there are no children, like Gilbert and Frances's. It sounds trite, but the best thing in life really are free: nature, companionship, a grateful disposition, and the worship of God. You're a unique individual who can follow God's plan just the way that you are. Vive la différence. Men and women are different, and we are all our own kind of cheese, and we should embrace and relish those differences, not fight against them, or seek to degrade femininity by attempting to imitate men. Women are beautiful and valuable to society precisely because they are women and not despite it. Sources of Sources of joy and wonder need not be expensive and are right in your own backyard if you exercise gratitude. Children, yes, even the messy and imperfect ones, are truly magical creatures, and creation is all around. Gratitude can turn even a difficult situation into an opportunity to grow closer to our Lord. And sometimes those little things, practicing gratitude and consciously trying to find joy and wonder in your life, we are predisposed to receive grace when we really need it. Next slide. Because our expression is imperfect, we need friendship to fill up the imperfections. This is where my Chestertonian friends come in. Throughout all this time, I was growing closer to Chesterton and growing in a spirituality of joy, wonder, and gratitude. I had many companions on the journey. Through our local society in Northern Illinois and St. Louis, I met amazing people who helped me to understand Chesterton more deeply and prayed for and encouraged me along the way. Once the pandemic hit, regular weekly online meetings with a group of Chestertonian women, the Chester Chicks, woo, allowed me to keep coming back to his thoughts and writing, to keep me sane in the midst of some general insanity and some truly difficult circumstances. As we shared our struggles and joys, we also discussed Chesterton's work and grew deeper in our understanding of his writings and our love and support of one another. Personally, I developed a habit of prayer, which included a morning offering, private prayer, an examination of conscience, scripture, and an essay of Chesterton's every day. I felt like there was more truth regarding current events in Chesterton's writings than anything there was I found online or in the mainstream media. But the real test of Chesterton's spirituality would come for me in a profound way during the first year of the pandemic. We moved to Baltimore, Maryland in May of 2020. Shortly after, we found out that we were expecting baby number 9. Because I was a geriatric mother, I was poked and prodded, and we found out that our daughter would likely be born with Down syndrome. Fortunately, they didn't find any immediate health concerns, and we were cleared for a home birth. Yay, I told you I'd talk about birth. Stephanie was born at home on St. Valentine's Day, a perfect love letter from God. Once she arrived, our midwife confirmed that yes, Stephanie appeared to have an extra chromosome and then left us to get to know one another. All of us fell immediately in love. Stephanie's midwife returned for her 24-hour checkup and realized something was not as it should be. They told us to head to Johns Hopkins for further tests. In the ER, I was completely shocked to find out that they had missed a serious heart defect, and she would need open heart surgery within the first few years of life. Plans were made to admit our baby overnight and then discharge her at home with equipment to monitor her oxygen. I was shocked and saddened to find out that she was one of the 50% of babies with Down syndrome who have a heart condition, but glad to be in the right place to deal with it. Stephanie and I settled in for the night on the cardiac floor, eagerly anticipating our discharge the next day so that our baby moon could continue. At about 3 in the morning on Ash Wednesday, we received some shocking news. In addition to trisomy 21 and congenital heart disease, Stephanie had a life-threatening blood disorder, and her doctors told us she needed chemotherapy, transferred her to the cardiac ICU. It was clear at that point that I would not need to give up chocolate to have a meaningful Lent. The next week was a constant struggle. Her abdomen began to swell and her labs were very abnormal, and she was jaundiced. She stabilized and we were able to continue her treatment on the oncology floor instead of the ICU, and I was hopeful we would be able to get her home to her siblings. We began counting down the minutes to the doctor's prediction of her discharge date. About a week after she was admitted, Stephanie's primary oncologist visited our room about 5 p.m. He told us that he had been consulting the world's experts on her condition, and he was sorry to tell us that things did not go as they had hoped. Our dear daughter was in liver failure, and they did not expect her to survive. Should I call my priest to have her baptized? Yes, now. When it happens, it will be quick. I messaged our priest, and he said he was on his way. I love you, Father Armando. Due to the pandemic, outside priests were not allowed in, but our nurses made the impossible happen. Stephanie was baptized and confirmed in the Catholic faith. I was in shock. I hadn't even heard of this condition the week before, and now it threatened to take our daughter's life. My mind went to some dark places. I started to despair. And then I began to pray. My thoughts turned to Chesterton's essay, where he remarked that little children were grateful to have their stockings filled at Christmas, and that we should be grateful and amazed to have our stockings filled every day. And as I did, I heard a quiet whisper in my ears. Look, Susan, she's right here with you. Look at that cute little nose and those beautiful toes. Find the wonder and beauty in this moment. If you spend the time you have with her, however long it may be, despairing about the future, you will miss the amazing gift you have been given today. In my darkest hour, Chesterton was a faithful companion. The gift of his spirituality paved the way for an infusion of supernatural joy. Everything became a wonder. By being fully present and open to the ordinary beauty of the present moment, my despair gave way to a celebration of life. I stayed awake most of the night with Stephanie on my chest. As the sun rose over the inner harbor of Baltimore outside our hospital window, I thanked God for the precious babe on my breast and the faithful husband sleeping at our side. My heart ached with the beauty of our ordinary little family, nestled in the arms of a loving father, and Chesterton was there with us, leading the way to joy and wonder and closer communion with our Lord in the midst of this terrible suffering. I did not know how long I would have with our sweet little girl, but every diaper change, feeding, burping, and snuggle took on a new meaning. The precious sacredness of the ordinary, the ultimate paradox. God was right there with us in a most intense way in all of the little things, even the diapers. A dirty diaper meant that she was still alive and with us for the moment. I knew that no matter what the future held, God would be with us, just as He was there as we savored these precious little gifts of ordinary life. He would be there whether He chose to take her home or leave her with us. By living in the moment and practicing gratitude for every little bit of Stephanie's life, and through supernatural grace, I was able to attain the joy and wonder explained to me by Chesterton through his writing. And that joy and wonder was of no small consequence. The joy and optimism I felt was truly supernatural, and I believe it contributed to her healing. She knew every moment that she was loved, and she felt joy and wonder, and that alone, because I refused to grieve her while she was still with me. I remember expressing my joy at small changes in the blood work day by day, feeling elated, showing off poopy diapers to the nurses. But some nurses found it difficult. I would express optimism and they would look away, eyes to the ground, desperately trying to avoid giving me false hope. Her numbers bottomed out from the chemotherapy, but her liver numbers kept improving to everybody's surprise, except maybe me. Moment by moment, I've held, nursed, burped, snuggled, and changed diapers for month upon month. After 3 weeks, she finished chemotherapy, had endured 2 surgeries, and was out of the woods and expected to survive. After 5 weeks, we went home on oxygen. 3 weeks later, we got rid of the oxygen, and now we lead a beautifully mundane existence, celebrating the milestones when they come and visiting our providers for monthly follow-ups. The same thing that caused her blood problem might cause leukemia, but if it does, Chesterton will be with me all the way. And her heart condition? Part of her heart has healed spontaneously, and the doctors don't know if they're ever going to have to do that surgery. The gifts that Chesterton has given me, both supernatural and natural, have worked together to help me fulfill my vocation in the world to becoming a better wife and mother. At the end of the day and at the end of our lives, all of the outside approval, pay, and recognition mean nothing. We shut the door to the outside world and are left with our families, the ordinary sacredness and beauty of that which is our own homes. Chesterton saw the danger of leaving this home unguarded. He knew that the job inside the home was very large, and it required the focus of a person capable of doing the most important role in society. This woman, being a cheese of distinct character and capabilities, is uniquely positioned to serve and cause flourishing in the family that God has given her. The path forward is simple but difficult. We live in a post-fence world, and it is difficult to reconstruct. But one family at a time and one decision at a time, we would do well to consider Chesterton's thought as we move towards a more well-ordered and well-functioning society. Critical to our success is acknowledgement of the importance and indispensability of one human being upon a larger plan. We each can do our part to support domesticity and ultimately a healthy society by acknowledging in our words and deeds the critical role of the domestic sphere and the half of humanity who does not give their best but gives their all. By encouraging me to be that human being upon a larger plan, and by supporting me with the gift of gratitude and spiritual childhood, Chesterton has helped me to become closer to the wife and mother I was meant to be, the one that my family needs, and the one that enjoys the despotic freedom of the domestic empress.
A little bit of time here, and I think it's hard to even know what to say because she said it all. But if anybody has any questions for Susan, maybe they want some advice.
Susan, thank you for a beautiful talk. And I feel bad now because I'm going to go back to something you said near the beginning, and this story at the end was so beautiful. But nonetheless, I especially appreciate your observation with respect to, Pinterest and internet influencers and the effect that, and I would say like HGTV and the cooking channel and the effect that these, I mean, this is something of a hyperbole, but nonetheless, I think this is like pornography for women.
Yes.
And no, I'm quite serious. And I'm troubled, especially because it's invaded, I think, what just for shorthand we'll call like the conservative Catholic sphere.
Mm-hmm.
And there, I don't know if it's still in print, but there was a magazine about beautiful Catholic living and all these sorts of things. I would just encourage you to, and if you just have the right candles, and I would just encourage you to continue to develop that, because I think it's a message that a lot of women who have made the decision, the right decision to stay home, now are faced with this, and then all kinds of passions of envy are excited by this, and the devil's always turning good things for ill. So I just want to thank you especially for that, and encourage you to continue to develop that thought, because a lot of people need to hear it.
Right. I 100% agree with that. I think that we are believing a lie. That when we think that we need to stay home. So it goes something like this. I work my job, I'm making X amount of dollars, I get a lot of kudos, and I come home and all I'm doing is staying home, right? So that's no big deal, right? And then at the end of the day, my place is a disaster. I'm a mess. I mean, this is the hardest thing I've ever done. And I have this myth that I think it needs to look like House Beautiful at the end of the day. And we're really hurting women when we tell them that that's what being home, that the most important thing I can do is cultivate joy and wonder. And if that means that I put aside the dirty laundry and we go outside and we look at a frog, then that's where our Lord wants us to be, all right? He wants us to be out with the frog, okay? The laundry will be there. It's infinite. Trust me. It's, you know.
Another question back here?
So, it was such a powerful talk, and I can't. You tell us your training isn't as an actuary. I mean, you need to be a writer, and I hope you break that down into 4 different essays that you published somewhere, because they were all each individually, effective. I was very affected because I work with kids like your daughter, and that was a very emotional story, very powerful. I guess my question to you is, we have a newest member of our Supreme Court who was asked during the hearings, what is a woman?
Mm-hmm.
And she is a woman, I think, but she declined to answer that question. Right. So I guess, where do we go from here?
Right. I mean, I think we refuse to participate in that. That's obviously a quarrel, right? So we just say no, all right? We rise above it, and we, in our own domestic spheres, we're not going to win that with an argument, right? Like Joe said, they're not even on the same page, right? They're redefining the vocabulary. So when we build our domestic spheres, all right, when we refuse to be Pinterested into despair, all right, and we have true joy and wonder in our homes, they will come asking, all right? They will want to know what we have. And what we have ultimately is Jesus Christ, right? So that's what they're going to come to. Yeah, totally.
We have a question submitted from one of our online participants. What are your thoughts on women who can't have children exercising their maternal capabilities with their pets?
Well, I think that these women, like Frances, are an untapped resource, okay? I know, I don't know enough about American history, but I do know there were times when there were women religious and when there was more of a local community, and women who didn't have children of their home supported those who did, okay? So I would say that if you don't have children of your own, there is someone in your parish, there is a neighbor. When your neighbor has a baby, you figure out how to make a casserole, Google it, and ship her off a casserole, all right? You take the kids when mom's looking frazzled, you suggest a field trip. We need everybody, right? The family, if you don't have a family of your own, you can find one to support. Bring your dog over and let the kids play with it and then bring it back home. That's what I would say.
And it wouldn't have to be casserole either. Change your mind? She already answered the question.
You seem like a pretty smart gal, Susan.
Why, thanks, Gilbert.
But it took you quite a while to figure this all out.
Okay, yeah.
What sort of advice might you give to some younger gals who are, thinking about getting married, thinking about starting a career?
I would say be gentle with yourself, because I grew up, it was already way post-fence. The indoctrination had already happened, right? So, no, it didn't click right away, all right? I knew that I wanted to be home, but it was a struggle, and that's okay, because it got me where I am today, all right? Sometimes we have to wrestle. So, I would say if you don't get it, if you got to go back and read some Chesterton, if I made you angry, that's okay. You're where you are and you're exactly where you're supposed to be. So I would say, continue to think about it, continue to wrestle with these questions, continue to seek truth. Engage in the argument, and our Lord wants all the cheese, or He wants you exactly how you are. So
this isn't so much a question as this isn't a question. I just have a comment to follow up on something he said. When I was married, my mother didn't teach me anything. And first of all, I'm old. I'm way back in the fence area.
Okay.
But my mother never taught me anything. And I was married into a traditional family with a man who expected me to know how to cook. Mm-hmm. And when I served breaded chicken necks, it was not favorably received. So what I would like to say is what helped me so much was the cooking shows on PBS.
Okay.
So when you're trying to encourage young women,
Yes.
please don't tell them that they shouldn't ever look at this stuff, but they should look at it from the standpoint of, can I learn something that would help me
Right.
do a better job in the way that my husband and I want to run our homes?
Right. And I'll be honest, I've used books. There are books about housekeeping. I have encyclopedic texts that are written like secular. And so, I'm a former actuary. I'm like, all right, let's see what they say, like how to get stains out of linen, like I wasn't taught either. So, there are things you can learn. You can use YouTube, you can use Pinterest. Those are tools, right? So the tool isn't wrong. We just have to make sure we don't allow a disordered use of it, right? So we can use the tools. We just have to make sure that we also understand that our Lord loves us right where we are. So we can't judge ourselves against what we perceive our all put together neighbor looks like, because that's a perception.
And Martha Stewart has a great recipe for roasted asparagus. I'm just
Right.
I have a few comments. I had my children in the 80s and 90s, and I was the only one out of my college friends who did not have a career and children. And when I would go to parties or something, people would say, "What do you do?" And I'd say, "Well, I'm a stay-at-home mom." And everybody'd kind of look away and change the subject. And then I realized that what I needed to say was, I am fortunate enough to be home with my children. And then right away, some of the moms would say, "Oh, well, I wanted to do that too."
Right.
And the other thing was that I found, not to go crazy, I really needed a support group
Yes.
right away. And that I would think would be the best advice for a new mom, would be a support group when you're going through that, because it's a very difficult time, especially if you've been used to intellectual conversations. You're not going to have them with your 1-month-old.
You don't, no. More
And-
quarrels than arguments.
And I wanted to comment on Christopher Check's comment. And we have a joke in our family about my house porn. And I want you to know that my last 3 issues of Traditional Home never made it out of the plastic sleeve. So, and I suppose my final comment, my husband and I drove here the 2,000 miles from the left coast. And we were listening to Irreparable Damage, and it's about the damage that the transgender craze is doing on our young women. And one of the things is that they just don't want to be women.
Right.
It's not so much that they want to be men, they just don't want to be women. And I think that those of us who can be joyful women, joyfully feminine, then that gives them something to look to.
Right. Right. And yes.
There's one right here.
Yes.
Thanks. My wife has something of a similar journey to yours, or is in an earlier stage with the sort of conversion to domesticity and also home birth. So I
Yes.
appreciate you sharing about that.
Okay.
That's really great. Could you share a little bit more, perhaps in detail, about how you came to be comfortable in your identity as a woman in the home?
Yes.
Maybe some things you've read or some things that really helped you to come to realize this is enough.
Yes. Well, it's everything really. So it's not just enough. I mean, this is what I choose. And I call Chesterton my 300-pound cheerleader. Okay. So I have a collection of his writings that I kind of compiled over the years. Some's from What's Wrong with the World, and there's some of his essays on feminism, on the modern suffragette, the Emancipation of Domesticity, and in Chesterton's writings, I found that this wasn't the also ran. This is like what I was designed to do. And actually, I have more freedom. I pity my husband. Now he's working from home, so I can hear the CEO calls. Okay, I can listen in on the meetings, and he is not putting imperceptible spices into his own soup. All right, he is being, he has a task and he's told what to do, and his freedom is limited. All right, even though he's pretty high up the ladder in a professional career. All right, so I'm thankful that I don't have to work outside the home, because I think we'd starve. Because at this point, I'm such a despot. Like, I don't think I could do that anymore. If you want me to follow rules, like, I don't know what that is. So I really see that freedom. And I do embrace, the title domestic empress. It's what Chesterton used for me. I consider him a friend. And I know he was talking about me. And he was talking about every one of us. It's not like I'm the domestic empress. I am a domestic empress. We are all domestic empresses, and that's regardless of the fact of whether or not we're natural mothers or not. I mean, women have in themselves the capacity for motherhood, physical and spiritual. Okay. And it's important. And it is a critical function of society. So I'm like, if I don't do what I'm doing, then society suffers. So it doesn't matter what Bob thinks about it at the cocktail party, all right? Because my identity isn't related to his opinion. It's related to my relationship with Jesus Christ, okay? And Chesterton has helped me see that. So that's what I would say.
Thank you very much. I have 2 questions.
Okay.
I will try to be brief. Question number 1. In our post-industrial era, when men in particular are working outside the home, what is the role of men in the domestic sphere? How do they fit into that structure, if you will?
Okay, so men, everything a man does, everything every human does on the planet should be focused towards the domestic sphere. Okay, so he goes out of the house because he has to, right? And he earns a living, but it should be for the home, all right? He's not doing it to for his vanity. He's not doing it. So every decision he makes about his career, every decision that he makes about, it should be, what am I doing this for? Because at the end of my life, it's going to be his wife and kids, all right? A CEO doesn't really care about me. All right. They might give me a title, they might give me some cash, but they might get rid of me tomorrow. And hopefully the wife and kids won't do that, So he, he needs to focus on that domestic sphere. So that's what I would encourage as a decision-making process for any person, And then if you're in a community and you don't have children of your own, think about that. How can I support my parish? How can I support the families around me? How can I build that up? Whether it's, tutoring a child in math, or whether it's bringing over a casserole or a fancy Martha Stewart dish like Dale does. And, we can't all be Dale. So that's what I say.
Thank you. And the second question is, this is actually taken from one of your slides. How do women who are not, quote, changeful, mystical, fickle, delightful, discover and explore their inner domestic empress?
Well, I would say that very much applies to me. So I was a tomboy, and I think that if I were raised now, I would be one of these targets of the transgender movement, right? Because I was very masculine. I had masculine interests. There's a spectrum, right? Where we all have, we're all on a spectrum. So I was in calculus 3 in my sophomore year. I skipped a grade. I was a math and science nerd, always in the class with only boys. Okay. But I would say, sorry, where was I? The women who don't immediately take to domesticity, I would say maybe you need to reconsider your view of what domesticity is. Because you are the mother and the wife, or maybe the wife only, or maybe you're the fairy godmother of your own realm, okay? You're a single woman. You define that domestic sphere, okay? You define what that is, all right? And you define how you're going to participate in it through prayer, through seeking the truth, okay? And it's not going to look like anybody else's. So I don't want conformity. I don't want you to say I have to be, I got to get myself an apron and I got to do something, all of those are false. Those are all an illusion. All right. So I'm not up here because Dale came over to my house and he's like, oh, so perfectly well kept, you must tell all the other ladies how to do this, So definitely not. You know, and I'm on a journey too. So I have an examination of conscience about finding joy and wonder with my kids, because sometimes I don't. All right. Because my inclination is to be task oriented, analytical, check things off the list. Let's get the tasks done, kids. And sometimes I neglect to stop and look in their eyes and find the joy and wonder and point them towards our Creator. All right. But that's, you know, I begin again. And Chesterton every morning with his essays like, you can do it, you know? So I try again. And that's what we should all do.
Susan, God bless you. Thank you for a marvelous